Yo! I was originally researching for a discussion solely about Alphys because I think she's a really interesting character. She has a nice range of arcs in Undertale. She's got the awkward anime girl who's too shy to confess her love to her crush thing going on. She has a big reveal where we see she's been doing some really weird stuff. And we get to see her grapple with her past mistakes and have a really satisfying redemption arc. And I think she's one of the few characters who have a neutral ending that adds a really interesting dimension to her character. I think Alphys is a really well-written character, but as I was going through her dialogue in Deltarune, I realized that I think what interests me more about her at this point is her relationship with Gerson. I think that so far, she hasn't really had enough time to show us what she's gonna do, but Gerson has some more interesting threads we can pull on based on the information that we have so far. Without rehashing what others have already talked about in regard to Gerson, I think that there are still some interesting things we can talk about. A good starting place is Gerson's shop dialogue in Undertale's genocide route, where he mentions that he knows the player can't hurt him, and that knowledge like that is why he's managed to survive so long. I've always thought this was an interesting line, and I know a lot of other people do too. The phrase knowledge like that in itself establishes a particular category of knowledge that Gerson has familiarity with. It's similar to how characters like Sham, Jevel, and Spamton all have peculiar knowledge that they probably shouldn't. As the player, we obviously recognize that this category of knowledge is self-awareness that they exist in a lower tier of reality. Gerson knows that we can't hurt him because he's a shopkeeper in an RPG, so we can't encounter him in a battle or interact with him as an NPC in the overworld. If you don't simply write the line off as a joke, it makes you wonder what other kind of information like that he has, and why does he have it? I rewatched Dork's Gerson video as a sort of Gerson refresher, and they talk about how Gerson and Alphys' connection in Deltarune is pretty similar to Alphys' and Gaster's connection in Undertale. And I think that those parallels are worth talking more about. In some ways, Gerson is kind of like a Diet Gaster. He's a somewhat obscure character who seems to have more importance than his Undertale appearance would initially suggest. The reason I say he's like Diet Gaster is because he possesses knowledge about how the inner workings of the world he exists in operate. But he's much more accessible to us than Gaster is. For comparison, Gaster's like Bigfoot, and Gerson's like a rare misprinted soda bottle. And I think that the way Undertale uses Gaster's connection to Alphys as a way to expound upon the guts of the story is useful to keep in mind whenever we examine what happens with Gerson and Alphys in Deltarune. In Undertale, Gaster helps flesh out the world building and background of the setting. We learn about his role as the royal scientist through the Goners and True Lab entries, and it helps us understand the world history of Undertale. Gerson does similarly in Deltarune. He's a beloved teacher and author, and we learn about his legacy through Alvin. Gaster and Gerson sort of mirror each other in that regard so far. In Undertale, Gaster is an important historical figure who's only absent because he was shattered across time and space. What a romantic idea. In Deltarune, Gerson is an important historical figure who's dead. In Undertale, however, Gerson is present, and he actually plays an active role in the story, even if it's just a tiny little baby one. In the genocide route in the background, the major objective for the monsters is to evacuate everyone to protect them from the player. Gerson tells you that, at least by talking to you, he's able to buy some time for others to escape. Obviously, it's a super insignificant role, but I think the fact that narratively, it's an active role as opposed to being purely passive is important to consider. Gaster hasn't appeared in Deltarune yet, but if you don't think he's going to play an active role at some point, I'm worried about you. Let me know in the comments if you're an anti-Gaster enthusiast, and why you think the Earth is flat. I'm kidding. Sort of. Gasters Knowledge is what makes him such a fascinating character in both Undertale and Deltarune. He's a godlike figure who exists on a different plane of reality than the other characters, some mysterious possible exceptions aside. He's hiding in the gaps everywhere in Deltarune. He's the first individual we're exposed to when we open the survey program. Before completing chapter 1, he comments on our interactions with the save menu. His funny little fellas have lost their goddamn minds. I don't think that Gerson in Deltarune is as aware as Gaster was in Undertale, but I think with the nature of the knowledge he has in Undertale, he does share a common thread with characters like Sham, Jevil, and Spamton that connect him to forbidden esoteric knowledge, and by extension, Gaster. There are also already hints that sands might exist in this category too, which I made a video about, that you should go check out after you finish this video and subscribe to my channel. Moving on, in Deltarune, the bench dialogue references a quote from Gerson saying that his best ideas frequently come from dreams. Dreams and their relationship with reality are an interesting topic in Deltarune. It's commonly discussed that Gerson may have some relation to or experience with Dark Worlds, and I think the fact that his Undertale counterpart has this strange meta-knowledge about why the player can't hurt him kind of supports that idea. I know it's a pretty natural connection to make, but I don't see people really explicitly say it, so I'm saying it for the record. Ultimately, I think that whether it's true that he does or doesn't have experience with Dark Worlds is going to be revealed to us through his connection with Alphys. Gaster and Alphys' connection introduces us to the True Lab, where we learn what she's been up to. True Lab is like Undertale lore smorgasbord, and I'm curious if we'll have a similar revelation in Deltarune where Alphys is a vehicle to explore that. There's Alvin's line in the graveyard where he prays that the angel smiles upon Alphys. I can imagine a world where we learn more information about Gerson or Dark Worlds through Alphys trying to fill his shoes as a teacher. And we know in Undertale, Gerson is like the only person old enough to know that the Deltarune originally had another meaning associated with it than is currently ascribed to it. So we're not lacking in possibilities. In Undertale, we're shown that Alphys is not the brilliant scientist that Gaster was. She probably barely passed science. Our interactions with her so far in Deltarune suggest she might be kind of doo-doo at teaching too. But we're also shown in Undertale that Alphys is capable of doing great things, and I would be really curious to see that come to fruition in Deltarune. We see in Undertale that Alphys can be a really serious character. In the Queen Alphys neutral ending, Alphys is not the nerdy, goofy scientist anymore. Her reflections on her own shortcomings in the Queen Alphys ending are so much more serious and sobering than the pacifist route ending, and she kind of becomes a badass. Even though the ending itself is kind of a bummer, holy shit. Kind of a mishmash of things today, huh? I wanted to make separate Alphys and Gerson videos, but in researching the topic, it kind of all blended together. In the end, I thought that examining Alphys and Gerson together and their parallel relationships with Gaster was worth talking about, and I think that we can use it in the future to maybe analyze more about Gaster as we get more information. Anyway, if you've gotten to this point, I appreciate you, and I hope that you enjoyed the video. As a little aside, how many of you have read Umineko? I feel like amongst the Deltarune community, there's this huge number of people who are also Umineko fans. What is this? Let me know. Also, subscribe or something.